The night was meant to celebrate success, but it became a nightmare that the entire city would remember. The Bright Futures charity gala shimmered with chandeliers and champagne, the air thick with perfume and pride. Under the golden lights of the Plaza Hotel, New York's most powerful gathered to toast their wealth. At the center of it all stood Blake Monroe, 34, ruthless CEO of Monroe Capital, smiling for the cameras with a woman who wasn't his wife. Across the ballroom, his 6 months pregnant wife, Lila Monroe, entered quietly. She had spent hours getting ready, wearing a soft ivory Dior gown that barely fit her growing belly. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her diamond bracelet, one of the few gifts from Blake she still cherished. She hoped tonight would heal what fame and power had destroyed between them. But fate had something far crueler planned. Blake's mistress, Clara Voss, glided across the marble floor like she owned it. Every man turned to look. Every woman whispered. Clara's crimson silk gown clung to her like temptation itself. And when she smiled at Lila, it wasn't kind. "You shouldn't have come," she said softly, her red lips curling. "Blake doesn't like surprises." Lila blinked back tears. "I'm his wife, Clara. Not a stranger." The orchestra swelled. Blake stepped onto the stage to deliver his speech. Cameras flashed. He didn't look at Lila once. Instead, he offered Clara his arm, as if she were his leading lady. A ripple of shock spread across the room. Murmurs turned into gasps. Lila took a shaky step forward, her heart pounding. "Blake," she whispered, voice trembling. "What is this?" Blake barely flinched. "Not now, Lila. You're making a scene." The words cut deeper than any knife. And that's when it happened. Clara leaned in close, pretending to adjust Lila's dress, but her diamond ring caught the delicate fabric. A deliberate tug, a soft tear. Then a sound so sharp it silenced the room. The silk ripped open from waist to hem. Gasps echoed like gunfire. Lila froze in disbelief as the gown slid off her shoulder, exposing her swollen belly under the blinding chandelier light. For a long, unbearable second, no one moved. The violinist's bow slipped. A champagne glass shattered. Then laughter, cruel, spreading like wildfire among the crowd. Clara pressed a hand to her mouth, feigning horror. Blake turned away, adjusting his cufflinks. Lila's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. She lifted her chin, pulled her shawl around her body, and walked out beneath the stunned gaze of New York's elite. Outside, the night air hit her face, cold and merciless. Flashbulbs followed her. The sound of clicking cameras chased every step, and as the headlines were written before dawn, no one yet knew the woman they had just humiliated carried not only a child, but the bloodline of one of America's most powerful empires. The headlines exploded before sunrise. CEO's wife humiliated at gala. Who is the mysterious woman beside Blake Monroe? By morning, every gossip site from Manhattan to Los Angeles had replayed the slow-motion clip. The rip, the gasp, the cruel laughter. It was no longer a private humiliation. It was a national spectacle. Inside the penthouse on Park Avenue, silence pressed like a weight against the glass walls. The city glittered below, indifferent. Lila sat on the edge of their white leather sofa, her Dior gown crumpled beside her like a dead thing. Her eyes were hollow, her lips trembling as she stared at the video on her phone for the 10th time. Each replay cut deeper. The front door slammed. Blake's cologne sharp, expensive, announced him before his voice did. "What the hell were you thinking, Lila?" She turned, stunned. "What I was thinking." "Blake," she tore my dress in front of everyone. "You embarrassed me," he snapped, pacing toward the minibar. He poured himself a glass of Macallan whiskey, ignoring her disbelief. "You knew the press was there. You made me look like a fool." Lila stood, her voice breaking. "I made you look like a fool. You walked in with your mistress. You let her." He slammed the glass down so hard the amber liquid splashed across the marble counter. "Watch your tone," her heart stuttered. "I'm carrying your child, Blake. Does that mean nothing to you?" He exhaled, exasperated. "It means everything, which is why you should have stayed home instead of parading around looking for pity." Tears threatened, but she refused to cry for him. "You think pity is what I wanted? I wanted my husband back." Jom. For a flicker of a moment, his face softened, but it vanished as quickly as it came. He downed the rest of his drink. You don't understand this world, Lila. Clara knows how to handle pressure. You never did. The name was a knife. Lila's chest tightened. Nausea clawed at her throat. She sank back onto the sofa, clutching her belly protectively. Get out, she whispered. What? Get out before I forget I loved you. Ho. Blake stared at her as if she were an inconvenience, then turned toward the balcony. You'll call my assistant if you need anything. We'll talk when you've calmed down. He left without another word. The door clicked shut. The silence that followed was louder than the gala had been. Lila pressed her palm to her stomach. The baby kicked once sharp, strong, alive. I'm okay, she whispered through a sob. We're okay. But she wasn't. Her body trembled, her chest tight. The world she had built, marriage, love, security, had cracked open overnight. Her phone buzzed again, notifications flashing like cruel taunts. Among them, a text from an unknown number. You don't deserve this. There's more you don't know. Check the safe. Lila blinked. The safe hidden behind a painting in Blake's office. Her pulse quickened. She rose slowly, steadying herself against the wall, and walked down the hallway. The office smelled of cigar smoke and deceit. She entered the code with shaking hands. The door opened with a low metallic click. Inside, between stacks of corporate documents, lay a faded photograph, a young woman with gentle eyes, holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. On the back, in smudged ink, were the words, "For WH, she has your eyes." Lila's breath caught. Who was WH? And why was her photo here, locked away in Blake's private safe? Before she could process it, her phone vibrated again. A second message appeared. He knows who you really are. Run before he decides you're no longer useful. Lila's hand froze over her stomach. Outside, the wind howled against the glass, and the city lights blurred into tears. And somewhere in that vast Manhattan skyline, a stranger who shared her blood had just seen her face on the morning news and recognized the daughter he'd lost 28 years ago. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Monroe Capital's glass tower, but inside Blake's corner office, the air was heavy with tension. The New York skyline stretched endlessly behind him, but he couldn't enjoy it. The company's board had called an emergency meeting. Overnight, Monroe Capital's stock had dropped 9%, investors spooked by the scandal from the plaza. The press wasn't just talking about his wife's humiliation anymore. They were questioning his integrity as CEO. Blake ran a hand through his hair, his phone buzzing nonstop with calls from PR advisors. He ignored them all. His focus was on Clara Voss, who sat across from him in a tailored gray suit that looked sharper than a blade. She didn't look worried. She looked in control. You have to act fast, Clara said, her tone smooth as silk. The board thinks you're unstable. They're whispering about forcing you out. But if you can show them that your wife is unfit, they'll back off. Blake's jaw tightened. Unfit? Lila's pregnant, Clara. That's not unfit. Clara leaned forward, her perfume Dior addict wrapping around him like a trap. You and I both know she's been emotional, forgetful. You told me she's been seeing a therapist. All we need is a small narrative shift. The CEO's wife is struggling with postpartum depression early. That gives you sympathy. It gives you control. Shul. He hesitated, staring at the woman who'd become his closest confidant and his biggest sin. She was brilliant, calculating in ways Lila never could be. You're suggesting I destroy her reputation? Clara smiled faintly. No. I'm suggesting you protect yours. Meanwhile, Lila sat at home on the balcony of their penthouse, staring at the photograph from the safe, the one labeled, "For WH." The name haunted her. She tried searching it online, but the letters were too vague. Her phone buzzed with a message from the PR office. Stay offline. No statements. No interviews. She obeyed, but unease gnawed at her. The intercom buzzed. Mrs. Monroe, Miss Voss is here to see you. Lila's stomach turned. Clara? Now? She opened the door cautiously. Clara stood there with a bouquet of lilies. Lila's favorite flowers. Blake asked me to check on you, she said sweetly, stepping inside without waiting for permission. He's worried about you. Lila forced a smile. Worried? After what happened? Clara sighed, setting the bouquet on the counter. He's under a lot of pressure. The media's tearing him apart. You could help fix that, you know? How? By signing a temporary power of attorney form. Let him manage your estate and holdings until the chaos dies down. It's just paperwork. Lila frowned. What holdings? I don't have any. Clara hesitated just long enough to betray herself. Of course. I just meant it's standard procedure for high-net-worth spouses. Something in Lila's gut screamed lie. She looked down at the envelope in Clara's hand, noticing the embossed seal on the top corner, Harrington Holdings. Her pulse skipped. That same name again. What's this? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Clara's smile faltered. Just routine legal coverage. Lila reached out slowly. Then you won't mind if I read it. Clara's eyes hardened. You should trust your husband. Daughter. Lila met her gaze. He's not the one standing in my kitchen with forged documents. For a moment, the two women stared at each other, one trembling, one seething. Clara finally stepped back, composure cracking. Fine, don't sign it. But remember, this people like you don't survive long in this world without protection. As the door closed behind her, Lila's heart pounded. She tore open the envelope and skimmed the pages. They weren't about power of attorney. They were stock transfer documents transferring ownership of Monroe Capital's trust funds to a holding company owned by Clara Voss. Lila sank into a chair, realizing the truth. This wasn't a scandal anymore. It was a setup. And Blake, blinded by ambition, was already helping the woman who planned to erase them both. Rain poured over Manhattan like the city itself was grieving. Lightning flashed across the skyline, illuminating the glass towers that had once made Lila feel safe. Now they looked like prison bars made of light. She stood barefoot on the balcony, the envelope of forged stock documents trembling in her hands. Every gust of wind cut through her like a blade. Somewhere inside, her unborn baby kicked, a faint reminder that she couldn't afford to fall apart. She stepped back inside, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. The penthouse was too quiet. No laughter, no warmth, just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of thunder. Blake hadn't come home. He hadn't called. The news continued to play on the muted television, looping the same humiliating footage of her dress being ripped. The captions beneath her name read, "Unstable wife of CEO." Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. "You can't trust anyone in that house. Leave tonight." She stared at the words until they blurred. Her heart raced. Who was sending these? Was it a journalist? A friend? Or worse, someone inside Monroe Capital? She packed a small suitcase, documents, a change of clothes, prenatal vitamins, and slipped on her coat. When she stepped into the elevator, her reflection in the mirrored wall startled her. Pale skin, swollen eyes, a woman who looked nothing like the one smiling in magazine photos beside her husband. The elevator doors opened to the lobby. The concierge, Mr. Harper, an older man with kind eyes, looked up in surprise. "Mrs. Monroe, are you going somewhere? The storm's getting worse." "I just need some air," she said softly. Her voice cracked. He hesitated, then handed her an umbrella. "Take mine, please." She managed a faint smile. "Thank you." Outside, the wind howled, tossing her hair into her face. She walked down Park Avenue with no direction, the city a blur of headlights and puddles. The world that had once applauded her now pretended not to see her. When a taxi splashed muddy water over her legs, she didn't even flinch. At the corner, she ducked into a small cafe for shelter. The neon sign flickered weakly. Midnight roast. Inside, the warmth and smell of coffee nearly broke her resolve. The waitress, a woman about her age, glanced at her soaked dress. "Rough night?" Lila gave a shaky laugh. "You have no idea." 2. The waitress poured her a cup of decaf and slid it across the counter. "On the house. You look like you could use something kind." Lila wrapped her hands around the mug, savoring the heat. For a brief moment, the storm outside faded. But then she saw it on the cafe's muted TV mounted above the counter, a photo of Blake and Clara, exiting a restaurant hand in hand. The headline read, "Monroe seen comforting his associate amid wife's breakdown." Her throat closed. The cup slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. Everyone turned to look, but she was already running. Back on the street, the rain had turned into a downpour. She stumbled into the nearest alley, her sobs drowned by thunder. She pressed her back against the brick wall, shaking uncontrollably. A car pulled up at the curb. The headlights blinded her. The window rolled down. A man's voice called out through the rain. "Mrs. Monroe?" She froze. "Who's asking?" The man stepped out, holding an umbrella. He was tall, wearing a dark coat, rainwater glistening on his shoulders. "My name's Noah Reed," he said. "I used to work for your husband. You don't know me, but I know what they're planning." Lila's pulse thundered in her ears. "How did you find me?" He looked at her with a mixture of urgency and pity. "Because I was supposed to deliver you to them tonight. But I changed my mind." Far. The next lightning strike revealed his face, and for the first time in days, Lila saw a trace of truth. But it came with a warning. "If you go home, you won't survive the week." Rain still streamed down the windshield as Noah Reed's car sped through the slick Manhattan streets. Lila sat in the passenger seat, her hands clasped protectively over her belly, heart racing faster than the wipers. She didn't know this man, only that he had appeared when no one else would. The city lights smeared across the glass like broken halos, and every turn made her wonder if she'd made a mistake trusting him. Noah kept his eyes on the road, jaw clenched. "I know you don't trust me," he said finally, voice low, steady. "But I couldn't watch what they were planning anymore." "What do you mean they?" "Blake and Clara," he said. "You weren't supposed to see those papers she brought you. They were preparing to move all your assets and the child's trust into her name. Once that happened, you'd be written off as unstable, maybe even institutionalized. Then you'd disappear quietly." Lila's breath hitched. "Disappear?" He nodded grimly. "A car accident. Or an overdose. They've used both stories before." For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The world tilted, and panic clawed its way up her throat. "You're lying." "I wish I were." The car stopped at a red light. He turned toward her, and in the glow of the street lamps she saw the exhaustion in his face, dark circles, rain-soaked hair, a quiet desperation that didn't look rehearsed. "I worked for Monroe Capital for 9 years. I know what Blake's capable of when his image is threatened." The light turned green. He drove again, slower now. "I can take you somewhere safe, somewhere no one knows." Lila hesitated. "Why help me?" His fingers tightened on the steering wheel. "Because once, I helped him destroy someone else. A woman. She didn't make it out. I've been trying to make it right ever since." The silence that followed was thick, heavy with ghosts. The rain softened as they left the city behind, entering quieter streets lined with brownstones. Finally, he pulled into a narrow alley behind an old brick building. "This is it," he said. "Third floor. A friend owns it, retired journalist. Doesn't ask questions." "R." Lila followed him up the creaking stairs, her shoes squelching with each step. The apartment was small but warm. Mismatched furniture, stacks of newspapers, a faint smell of coffee and dust. A cat meowed lazily from the couch. "You'll be safe here," Noah said, setting her suitcase down. "I'll check in every few hours. Don't answer the door for anyone." She looked at him, uncertain. "Why do I believe you?" He met her eyes. "Because I'm the only one who hasn't asked you for something." "Hallman?" Lila lowered herself into an armchair, exhaustion finally hitting her. She wanted to ask more how he'd found her, what he knew, but her body was shaking from adrenaline and fear. Noah turned to leave, but she stopped him. "Wait," she said softly. "Do you know someone named W.H.? I found a photo," it said. "For W.H., she has your eyes." He froze at the door. "W.H.? Yes. Do you know what it means?" Noah's expression shifted, as if the name triggered something long buried. "You need to rest," he said quickly, avoiding her gaze. "We'll talk in the morning." But after he left, she couldn't sleep. The initials echoed in her mind, tangled with memories she didn't understand. Her mother's voice, a lullaby, a half-finished sentence from childhood. "If anything ever happens, find him. He'll know what to do." Lightning flashed through the window, casting long shadows across the room. Lila clutched the photograph to her chest, whispering to the unborn child she carried. "We'll survive this," she said. "Even if no one wants us to." Outside, down the street, a black Mercedes idled with its lights off. Inside sat Clara Voss, watching the building through the rain. She spoke into her phone, her voice cold and precise. "She's not running far enough," Clara said. "Finish the job." Lila woke to the sound of distant church bells and rain dripping from the fire escape. For a moment she didn't know where she was. The old apartment smelled faintly of ink and coffee. A ghost of someone else's life. Then everything rushed back. The ripped dress, Blake's cruelty, Clara's lies, Noah's warning. Her hands went instinctively to her belly. The baby kicked once, steady and alive. That single movement gave her strength. She pushed herself up from the couch and noticed a folded note on the table. Noah's handwriting was neat and deliberate. "Had to check something at the office. There's food in the fridge. Stay inside." Beneath it, a business card from a law firm, Goldman and Avery, estate law. Scrawled in ink on the back, "Ask for Mr. R. Donnelly." Your mother trusted him. Her pulse quickened. Her mother's name hadn't been spoken in years. Lila tucked the card into her coat pocket and poured herself a glass of water. She hesitated, then dialed the number. "Goldman and Avery, this is Donnelly." "Mr. Donnelly, my name is Lila Monroe," she said softly. "I was told you knew my mother, Margaret." Silence on the other end, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "Lila, you're Margaret Harrington's daughter?" The name struck her like a bolt. "Harrington?" He sighed. "She must have kept it from you. Your mother was married to William Harrington before she met your father. They separated after a scandal in his company, and she disappeared. We all thought you both were dead." Jen Raven. The phone nearly slipped from her hand. "I don't understand. My mother never mentioned him. She was protecting you," Donnelly said gently. "William had enemies, people who would have used you to get to him." Her knees gave way. She sank to the floor, the truth flooding her like ice water. The initials on the photograph, WH, suddenly made sense. The man she'd been told was long gone, was alive. And powerful. Donnelly's voice lowered. "There's a file here, sealed under your mother's name. You're the only one authorized to open it. If you can come by Esliz." "No." She cut in quickly. "It's not safe. Can you send it to me? I can try. But be careful, Lila. If your husband's been working with certain investors, they might already know who you are." The line went dead. Her hands shook as she lowered the phone. Outside, the storm had eased, leaving the city wrapped in a silver mist. She turned the photo over again, her mother smiling. The faint scrawl of "for WH" on the back. It wasn't just a message. It was proof. The knock on the door startled her. Her heart leapt into her throat. "Who is it?" "It's me," came Noah's voice. She opened the door halfway. He looked tense, rain clinging to his coat. "You shouldn't have called anyone," he said. "They've started tracing your number." Her stomach dropped. How could they know? "Because Blake has people inside every telecom company we ever used. You have to move again. Tonight." She clutched the photograph. "Noah, listen. My mother's maiden name was Harrington. I think my father's alive." He froze mid-step, staring at her. "What did you say?" "William Harrington. Do you know him?" He hesitated too long. "Everyone in finance knows him. He vanished 25 years ago, after a hostile takeover went wrong." "Why?" "Because I think he's my father." Noah's face went pale. "Then you're in more danger than I thought." Before she could speak, the sound of tires screeched outside. Headlights flashed through the rain-streaked window. A figure stepped out of a car and lifted something metallic. A camera? No. A gun. Noah lunged forward, pulling Lila down as a bullet shattered the window. Glass rained across the room. The cat hissed and darted under the couch. Lila screamed, clutching her stomach. Noah covered her with his body as another shot rang out. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the shooting stopped. Through the chaos, Noah whispered into her ear, his breath ragged. "They know who you are now, Lila. And they'll do anything to make sure the world never finds out." The morning after the gunfire, the world seemed almost too still. A fine layer of glass dust glittered on the floor where the window had shattered. Lila sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in a blanket, staring blankly at the skyline. The police had come and gone, writing it off as a random act of violence. But she and Noah knew better. Random didn't travel with silencers. Noah poured her a cup of coffee, his hands steady though his eyes were rimmed with exhaustion. "We can't stay here," he said. "They'll send someone else." Lila clutched the cup, trying to absorb its warmth. "Then where do we go? We can't just keep running." He hesitated. "We don't have to. We fight back." At Monroe Capital, Blake was already orchestrating his next move. He stood before the board of directors in a sleek gray suit, all calm confidence. The scandal had bruised his reputation, but not broken it, at least, not yet. Clara Voss sat beside him, flipping through financial reports like she owned the room. "Gentlemen," Blake began, his voice smooth, commanding. "The market's jittery, but this is temporary. Once we complete the liquidity merger with the foreign investors, Monroe Capital will regain stability." One of the older board members, Mr. Lang, adjusted his glasses. "And this merger, you're sure it's the right move? These investors from Harrington Holdings, we've heard rumors." Blake cut him off with a practiced smile. "Rumors are for tabloids, Lang. This is strategy." Across the table, Clara interjected. "The paperwork will be finalized today. Once it's signed, the company's future is secured." The irony was almost poetic. Neither of them realized that the controlling shares they were selling off belonged not to a faceless corporation, but to the daughter of the man they were trying to cheat, Lila Harrington Monroe. Back in the safe house, Noah spread documents across the table. "Your husband's merging with Harrington Holdings," he said. "If you really are who you think you are, that company technically belongs to you." "Which means," Lila finished his sentence softly, "he's selling my inheritance to cover his own mistakes." Noah nodded grimly. "Exactly. And if he does, you'll lose everything before you even know what's yours." She pressed her fingers to her temple, the beginnings of a headache pounding behind her eyes. "We have to stop him." He studied her for a moment, then pulled a small flash drive from his pocket. "I downloaded something from the company server before I left. Proof of illegal offshore transfers under Clara's name. If we leak this, they'll turn on each other." Lila met his gaze. "Won't that destroy the company?" "Maybe," Noah said. "But sometimes things have to break before they can be rebuilt." For the first time in days, she almost smiled. "You sound like my mother." The phone on the table buzzed suddenly, startling them both. An unknown number again, but this time, instead of text, it was a video message. Lila pressed play. Blake appeared on the screen, standing in his office, perfectly composed. "Lila," he said, voice cold, rehearsed. "You're making a mistake running. People are worried. If you come home, we can fix this. Otherwise." He stepped aside, revealing Clara in the background, holding a tabloid with Lila's photo under the headline, "Pregnant CEO's Wife Missing, Possible Breakdown." Blake's voice turned icy. "The longer you hide, the more unstable you'll look. You'll lose custody before the baby's even born." The video ended. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thinner. Lila's hands shook, but her eyes burned with something fierce. "He wants war," she whispered. "Fine. I'll give him one." Noah watched her, both in awe and fear. "You sure you're ready for that?" She looked out the cracked window, at the city that had mocked her, used her, and now dared to erase her. "He took my dignity, my home, my peace," she said quietly. "Now I'll take his empire, Twelzen." And somewhere in a skyscraper uptown, Blake Monroe signed a deal with Harrington Holdings, unaware he had just sold his company to his own wife. The next morning, fog clung to the streets like a secret. Lila hadn't slept. She sat by the window of the small apartment, her hair tangled, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. Noah had left before dawn to deliver the flash drive to someone he trusted, an old journalist who owed him a favor. He'd promised to be gone only a few hours, but now it was past noon, and every minute of silence felt like an eternity. When the knock finally came, her heart leapt until she saw the envelope slid under the door. No sound, no footsteps. Just a white envelope sealed with black wax. Her breath caught. On the front, in neat handwriting, were 2 words, "For Lila." She tore it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper. "You don't understand what you've stepped into. This isn't just about your husband. Walk away while you still can. If you go to the police, they'll find you first. And if you try to claim what's yours, the baby dies first." The room spun. Her vision blurred as the words burned into her mind. The sound of her own heartbeat filled the silence. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself, fighting the urge to scream. Then she saw something else in the envelope, a small flash drive, unlabeled. For a second she hesitated, then plugged it into Noah's old laptop. The screen flickered, then opened to a single video file. Blake's office, Clara's voice. "We can't risk her being alive when the merger closes," Clara was saying, her tone flat and precise. "If she goes public about the Harrington name, the investors will panic. I can handle it quietly." Blake's voice followed, cold and detached. "Do whatever you have to. Just make it look like an accident." Lila covered her mouth to stop the sob from escaping. They were planning to kill her. Before she could think, her phone rang. No caller ID. She answered, her voice barely a whisper. "Hello? Mrs. Monroe," a man's voice said smoothly. "We met once, at your husband's charity event. Mr. Keller, legal counsel for Monroe Capital. I believe you have something that doesn't belong to you." Her blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "The file, the video. We both know what I mean. Listen carefully, return it, and no one gets hurt. Keep it, and we'll collect it ourselves. Do you understand?" Lila forced her voice steady. "If anything happens to me or my child, that video goes straight to every news network in New York." He laughed softly. "You really think anyone will believe a hysterical pregnant woman over a billionaire CEO?" The line went dead. Her entire body shook. She backed away from the table, clutching her stomach. The baby kicked again, as if reminding her that she couldn't break now. Moments later, the door burst open. Noah stood there, drenched in sweat, breathless. "Pack your things. We're leaving." "What happened?" she asked. "They know about the drive. My contact got grabbed outside his office. Someone leaked the location. We have to go now." He crossed the room, grabbed her suitcase, and stuffed the laptop inside. "We'll head north, to a safe house in Connecticut. It's owned by someone who used to work for Harrington. You'll be protected there." As they rushed down the stairwell, Lila's mind replayed the voice on the call, the words from the letter, the calm cruelty in Blake's tone. "Do whatever you have to." She knew then, this wasn't just betrayal or greed, it was war. Outside, the sky darkened again. Rain began to fall, thin and relentless, as they disappeared into the chaos of the city. And in a high-rise office miles away, Clara Voss watched their GPS signal blink across her screen. "Run." "Lila," she whispered, her red lips curling into a smile. "It makes the hunt so much more fun." The cabin sat at the edge of a forest in Connecticut, hidden behind a curtain of mist and pine. By the time Noah's car rolled to a stop, Lila was pale from exhaustion, her hand pressed against her belly. Every bone in her body ached, but she forced herself to stay alert. She'd learned the hard way that safety was an illusion. Noah helped her out, glancing around the silent clearing. "No one followed us," he said, his voice low but tense. "We'll stay here for a few days." Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of cedar and old books. The fire was already lit, a soft orange glow flickering against the walls. Lila sank into an armchair, her trembling finally easing. Noah poured her a glass of water, watching her with quiet concern. "You need rest," he said. She nodded, but her eyes kept drifting toward the window. The forest beyond looked endless, peaceful, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching from somewhere out there. "I called Mr. Donnelly before we left," Noah said after a pause. "He said someone came to his office after your call. A man. Tall, gray hair, expensive suit. He asked for your file." Lila's pulse quickened. "Did he say his name?" "He didn't have to," Noah said softly. "Donnelly said the man looked exactly like you." Her breath caught. "William Harrington?" He nodded. "If it's really him, he's been looking for you." Before she could respond, the cabin door creaked. Noah reached instinctively for his gun, stepping between her and the doorway. But the figure that emerged from the shadows wasn't a threat. It was an older man, impeccably dressed, even in the wilderness, his silver hair slicked back, his eyes a stormy gray. Lila froze. Something deep inside her recognized him before her mind caught up. The shape of his jaw, the way he carried himself. She had seen that same face in the faded photograph. "Lila," he said quietly, his voice trembling with age and emotion. "You have your mother's eyes." Her heart hammered. "Who are you?" He took a hesitant step forward. "My name is William Harrington, and I'm your father." The room seemed to tilt. She stared at him, tears filling her eyes. "No, that's not possible. My mother said you were gone." "Trial. She said that to protect you," he said, his voice breaking. "After I lost her, I tried to find you both, but Blake Monroe's company had already buried your identity. I only learned you were alive after that video from the gala. I saw you pregnant, terrified, and I knew." Lila covered her mouth with a trembling hand. "You saw that?" He nodded slowly. "Every second. And I swore I would never let another man humiliate you again." The silence between them was thick with unspoken years. Finally, Lila took a shaky breath. "Why now? After all this time?" "Because they're coming for you," William said. "And I can stop them." He opened a leather briefcase and pulled out a folder. "Harrington Holdings has been quietly buying Monroe Capital stock for months. I already control 49%. You, as my heir, own the rest." Lila stared at him, disbelief and hope warring in her chest. "You mean I could take the company from Blake?" "You can take everything," he said, his gaze steady. "But you have to be willing to fight the way he does." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she looked at Noah, who gave her a small nod. "I'll do it," she whispered. "Not for revenge for my child." William's expression softened, pride flickering through the grief in his eyes. He reached out, touching her cheek gently. "You are stronger than your mother ever was," he said. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying the faint echo of thunder. Neither of them noticed the tiny red light blinking under the cabin's window, a GPS tracker. Clara Voss already knew where they were. The storm outside the cabin raged like the world itself was splitting in two. Wind lashed against the windows. Thunder rolled through the forest, and the fire burned low, throwing wild shadows across the wooden walls. Lila lay on the couch, her face pale, beads of sweat glistening on her forehead. The contractions had started hours earlier, but now they came fast, relentless. Noah knelt beside her, holding her hand. "You're okay," he said, his voice steady, though his eyes betrayed his fear. "Just breathe. Stay with me." She gripped his hand tightly, gasping through another wave of pain. "It's too soon," she whispered. "The baby, it's not time yet." "Trained." William stood near the window, barking orders into his phone. "I need a doctor and a helicopter now. I don't care what it costs, just get them here." Static answered him. The storm had taken down the signal. He slammed the phone on the table in frustration. "Damn it. The roads are flooded. We're on our own." Lila's scream filled the room. Noah placed a hand on her shoulder, eyes darting toward William. "We have to deliver him here. She can't wait." William froze. The sight of his daughter writhing in pain, his blood, his second chance tore through his composure. "I don't know how," he said hoarsely. "I do," Noah said, surprising them both. "My sister's a nurse. She taught me enough." He grabbed towels, boiled water, and did what he could to prepare. The cabin became an island of chaos and prayer. Lila's breath came in ragged sobs. She bit down on her lip, her knuckles white. "Listen to me," Noah said softly, wiping her forehead. "You're not alone, Lila. You're safe. You're going to see your baby's face tonight." Her gaze locked onto his, searching for truth. In that moment, she didn't see fear or pity, only fierce determination. And somehow, that was enough. Time blurred into flashes of lightning and whispered encouragements. Then, with one final cry that seemed to tear the storm itself apart, the sound came a sharp, fragile wail. A baby's cry. Noah exhaled, relief flooding his face. He held up the tiny, wriggling child, wrapped in a clean towel. "It's a boy," he said, his voice breaking. Lila's tears streamed freely now, pure joy mixing with exhaustion. "Let me see him," she whispered. He placed the baby in her arms. The child's cries quieted instantly as his cheek pressed against her chest. She traced his tiny fingers with shaking hands. "Ethan," she murmured. "His name is Ethan." William knelt beside them, awe softening his sharp features. "He looks just like you did," he said quietly. "Your mother would have been so proud." For the first time, Lila saw the man beneath the legend. The powerful tycoon looked older, smaller human. She reached out and took his hand. "Then help me protect him," she said. "Help me make sure he never grows up surrounded by lies." William nodded. "You have my word." Outside, the storm began to ease, rain softening to a whisper. But just as the peace settled, Noah's phone buzzed with a single text message. "Unknown number. Congratulations on your heir. He won't live to inherit it." Noah's blood ran cold. He turned off the phone, forcing a calm he didn't feel. He didn't tell Lila, not yet. Instead, he stepped outside, scanning the dark woods, hand on the gun tucked beneath his jacket. Lightning flared once more, revealing tire tracks in the mud. Someone had already been there, watching. Inside, Lila rocked her newborn, humming the same lullaby her mother once sang. She had no idea how close danger still lingered outside those walls. But in that fragile moment, holding her son for the first time, she felt powerful, untouchable. Because even if the world wanted her broken, she had just brought new life into it, and nothing could ever take that victory away. Morning sunlight filtered through the clearing skies, casting soft golden light across the forest. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to embers. Lila sat propped against a pillow, her newborn son asleep in her arms. His tiny breaths were steady, his warmth anchoring her to a world that had nearly swallowed her whole. Noah watched from the doorway, silent, protective, one hand resting on his gun. The storm outside had passed, but the one they feared most still waited beyond those trees. In Manhattan, the same dawn painted the skyline over Monroe Capital's headquarters. Clara Voss strode through the marble lobby in her signature stilettos, exuding confidence. But her expression was tight. Her phone buzzed with messages from Blake, each one angrier than the last. "Why aren't the accounts updated? Where is the transfer confirmation? The board's panicking. Fix this." Clara ignored them, heading straight for the private elevator. On the 39th floor, Blake was pacing behind his desk, his tie loosened, his perfect composure cracking. "You were supposed to finalize the merger," he barked as soon as she entered. "Why haven't you?" She set her purse down calmly. "Because the funds are frozen." "What?" "The Harrington accounts," she said, meeting his gaze. "Every wire, every asset you tried to move, it's been locked. Someone higher up issued a stop order." Blake's jaw tightened. "That's impossible." "Harrington Holdings approved the sale." Clara's lips curved in a small, bitter smile. "Apparently, they've changed their mind." "Sen." He turned pale. "You mean?" "I mean your wife's father just bought controlling shares of your empire," she said coldly. "And he did it while you were too busy playing the loyal husband on television." Blake sank into his chair, the color draining from his face. "She knows," he whispered. "Yes," Clara said, her voice laced with venom. "And she's going to destroy you. Maybe us both." But as she turned to leave, her phone vibrated again. She glanced down and froze. The notification came from her private Swiss account. "Access denied. Funds revoked." Her eyes widened. "No," she breathed. She opened her laptop, typing frantically. Every account, every offshore holding gone. Emptied. Blake watched her crumble with cold satisfaction. "Looks like someone betrayed the wrong people," he said quietly. Clara looked up, trembling with fury. "You did this. You moved my money." He shrugged, almost amused. "Insurance, Clara. You didn't think I'd let you walk away rich, did you? You're just a liability now." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You used me. And you thought you were using me," he said. "That's how this game works." The room filled with silence. Clara's carefully constructed world, her power, her money, her safety had collapsed in an instant. She stared at Blake, seeing the man she'd worshipped for years turn into a stranger. "I made you," she said through clenched teeth. He smiled faintly. "And now you're obsolete." When she left the office, her heels clicked like gunfire against the marble floor. Her reflection in the mirrored walls didn't look human anymore, it looked hunted. Meanwhile, in the quiet cabin miles away, Lila watched her baby sleep. William sat nearby, reviewing documents by the firelight. "The stocks are locked," he said, his tone calm but resolute. "Blake and his mistress won't touch another cent. The board is shifting toward us." "P." Lila looked down at Ethan's face. Good, she whispered. Let them feel what it's like to lose everything. But William's eyes flicked toward the window, worry shadowing his pride. Be careful, Lila. People like them don't surrender, they implode. And when they do, they take others down with them. Outside, in the distant city, Clara's car screeched into the underground garage of her luxury apartment building. She slammed the door, shaking, eyes wet but wild. She didn't notice the man in the shadows waiting by the elevator until he stepped forward and spoke her name. Miss Voss, he said, voice smooth, emotionless. Mr. Monroe sends his regards. The elevator door slid shut. Only one of them would leave that building alive. The fire crackled softly in the hearth as dusk settled over the Connecticut woods. The storm had long passed, leaving the sky a bruised shade of purple. Lila sat by the window, her newborn asleep in a woven bassinet beside her. She should have felt safe, but her thoughts were heavy, haunted by what William had told her. Across the room, her father sat at a wooden desk, a glass of bourbon untouched beside him. Papers covered every surface: legal contracts, financial transfers, confidential memos from Monroe Capital. For the first time, he looked tired. Not like the billionaire titan she'd seen in business magazines, but like a man who had carried too many ghosts. You haven't said a word since morning, she said quietly. He looked up, startled. I've been trying to undo 25 years of mistakes, he said, his voice rough. It takes time. Lila studied him carefully. Mistakes like abandoning my mother? He winced. You think I don't replay that every night? When your mother left, I thought she'd come back. But she disappeared. And when I found her again, it was too late. She told me you chose your company over her, Lila said. I did, he admitted, his shoulders sagging. Back then, power was everything. I thought I could control the world. I didn't realize the cost until it was gone. He looked toward Ethan's bassinet. You're my second chance, Lila. I won't lose you too. So, the words hit her harder than she expected. She wanted to stay angry, to protect the walls she'd built around her heart, but a small part of her ached for connection, for family. Then help me end this, she said finally. Help me make sure Blake can never hurt anyone again. William nodded slowly. That's exactly what I intend to do. He opened a folder and handed her a stack of papers. These are the formal transfer documents. Effective immediately, you hold controlling interest in Monroe Capital through Harrington Holdings. You're now the majority shareholder. Lila stared at the papers, her hands trembling. You're giving me your company? I'm giving you back what should have always been yours, he said softly. But this isn't about money, Lila. This is about legacy, about choosing what kind of power you'll wield. Her eyes welled with tears. I don't want to become like you or like him. Won. William gave a faint, sad smile. Then you've already won. A moment of silence passed before he coughed softly at first, then harder. His face paled, and his hand gripped the desk for balance. Dad, she said, rushing to him. He tried to wave her off. It's nothing, just stress. But his breathing grew shallow, uneven. Panic flared in her chest. Noah, she called. Noah ran in, eyes wide. What happened? He's not breathing right, call someone. But there was no signal. The nearest hospital was miles away. Noah knelt beside William, checking his pulse. Heart attack, he said grimly. We need to get him to a doctor now. They tried everything, compressions, breaths, desperate prayers, but the older man's eyes fluttered weakly. He grabbed Lila's hand, his voice a rasp. Listen to me, don't stop. Take everything they stole from you, for your son. Tears streamed down her face. Don't talk like that, please. But his hand went limp. The fire crackled once more, then fell silent. For a long time, no one spoke. Noah lowered his head. I'm sorry, he whispered. Lila sat frozen, clutching her father's hand, her sobs soundless. The man who had built an empire and destroyed a family had finally found peace, but only in death. When dawn came, she stood over his body, her grief hardening into resolve. You wanted me to fight, she said softly. I will. Outside, a single black SUV slowed on the dirt road before driving away. Clara Voss's voice drifted from inside. Let her grieve, she said coldly. It'll make her easier to break. The Manhattan skyline glittered under a pale winter sun as if nothing in the world had changed. But everything had. 3 weeks after William Harrington's death, the city buzzed with rumors about his mysterious heir. No one knew her face, but whispers filled every boardroom and luxury penthouse on Park Avenue. Some said she was ruthless. Others said she was a ghost. Lila watched the news from a Blacktown car parked outside the Plaza Hotel, her reflection framed by the tinted glass. Gone was the fragile woman whose dress had been ripped in front of cameras. Her hair was sleek, her gaze calm, her posture regal. She wore a tailored white suit that mirrored power rather than pleaded for it. On her wrist gleamed a thin Cartier bracelet, her mother's, restored and worn like armor. Noah sat beside her, adjusting the cuffs of his charcoal suit. "You don't have to do this alone," he said quietly. "I do," she replied. "He needs to see me." The driver opened the door. Lila stepped out into the icy wind and the flashes of paparazzi cameras. Questions fired like bullets. "Mrs. Monroe, where have you been? Is it true you inherited Harrington Holdings? Are you divorcing the CEO?" She didn't answer. She simply walked, heels clicking on marble. Every step a declaration that she was no longer the woman they had mocked. Inside the Plaza's ballroom, the annual Business Leadership Summit was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers bathed the crowd in golden light, the same light that had once exposed her humiliation. But this time, she owned it. At the far end of the room, Blake Monroe stood surrounded by investors, his smile strained. He turned mid-conversation and froze. The chatter around him dimmed as people turned to follow his gaze. Lila Monroe had returned. She crossed the room slowly, every eye fixed on her. The air seemed to still as she stopped just a few feet from him. "Hello, Blake," she said softly. For a moment, he couldn't speak. "Lila, you're alive?" She finished for him. "Yes." Hard to believe, isn't it? The tension in the room was electric. Cameras clicked discreetly, capturing the reunion. Lila tilted her head, studying the man who'd once vowed to protect her. He looked smaller, somehow still polished, but hollow behind the charm. "I heard about your father," Blake said, his tone carefully sympathetic. "I'm sorry for your loss." She smiled faintly. "I doubt that." He blinked. "What do you mean?" Lila reached into her clutch and pulled out a single envelope, the legal transfer of ownership William had signed before his death. "This is the merger agreement you've been bragging about, the one that saved Monroe Capital?" Blake's jaw tightened. "What about it?" "You sold your company," she said. "To me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a champagne glass. Blake's composure cracked for the first time. "That's impossible. I signed with Harrington Holdings." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Exactly. I am Harrington Holdings." The words landed like a thunderclap. Every whisper in the ballroom turned into a storm. Blake's face went pale. I told you once you'd regret underestimating me," she said calmly. "Consider this my fulfillment of that promise." She turned away, but not before adding, "And don't worry, Blake. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for justice." Noah appeared at her side, offering his arm. As they walked out, the crowd parted like water around her. The cameras followed, but Lila didn't flinch. Outside, the wind caught her hair, lifting it like a banner. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running anymore. And somewhere behind the hotel's frosted windows, Blake Monroe stood frozen, realizing the truth, too late. The wife he'd discarded had just become the most powerful woman in his world. The next morning, New York's financial world woke to chaos. Monroe Capital's stock plunged 12% in the first hour. News outlets were buzzing. Heiress Lila Harrington Monroe takes control of Monroe Capital. CEO's secret wife returns from exile. It was the scandal of the decade, and Blake Monroe was at the center of it. Inside his glass-walled office, Blake stared at 3 television screens, showing his downfall from every angle. Clara's empty chair across from him seemed to mock him. He rubbed his temples, sweat beading at his hairline. "This can't be happening," he muttered. "It's impossible." The door opened. The board of directors entered 12 men and women in somber suits. Their expressions were tight, unreadable. Mr. Lang, the senior member, cleared his throat. "We've received documentation, Mr. Monroe." The merger with Harrington Holdings was valid. Mrs. Monroe now holds majority control. Blake's face drained of color. She manipulated me. She forged those papers. Mr. Lang laid a tablet on the desk. It's all legal. You signed everything yourself. And there's something else. He pressed play. Blake's own voice filled the room, cold and unmistakable. Do whatever you have to. Just make it look like an accident. A second voice, Clara's, answered. I can handle it quietly. The recording played again, echoing off the marble. Blake's hands trembled. Where did you get that? Mr. Lang looked grim. It was delivered to every member of the board at dawn. And to the SEC. Blake staggered back from the desk, realizing what this meant. He wasn't just losing his company, he was about to lose his freedom. She set me up, he whispered. Downstairs, in the grand auditorium of Monroe Capital's headquarters, cameras flashed as hundreds of employees gathered for an emergency shareholders meeting. Reporters filled the aisles, the air thick with speculation. The giant LED screen displayed a single name, Lila Harrington Monroe. When the doors opened, she entered flanked by 2 security guards and Noah at her side. She wore a black power suit, her expression composed but unyielding. Conversations hushed instantly. Good morning, she began, her voice calm but firm, amplified through the microphone. My name is Lila Monroe. Some of you may remember me as the woman this company tried to erase. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I was called unstable, manipulative, unfit to be a wife, let alone part of this empire. But today, I'm not here to ask for pity. I'm here to tell the truth. Behind her, the massive screen flickered to live security footage from Blake's office. The same recording Mr. Lang had shown him now played for the entire world to see. Blake's voice filled the room again, damning, undeniable. Gasps, whispers, and then silence. I was supposed to die in an accident, Lila continued, her tone unwavering. But my child and I survived. And now, I intend to make sure no one in this company or any woman will ever suffer the same cruelty again. Reporters leapt to their feet, shouting questions. Cameras flashed wildly. Noah placed a steadying hand on her back, whispering, You did it. She looked out over the sea of stunned faces. Effective immediately, she said. Blake Monroe is removed from his position as CEO. A full investigation has been submitted to the authorities. Monroe Capital will no longer be defined by greed, but by integrity. Upstairs, Blake watched from his office window as security escorted him out through the side exit. The flashes from the press cameras hit his face like gunfire. As the elevator doors closed, he caught one last glimpse of Lila on the screen downstairs, strong, radiant, untouchable. Outside, as she stepped onto the marble steps, the winter wind rushed past her, carrying away years of silence and pain. Noah walked beside her, holding her coat. You exposed him, he said quietly. He's finished. Lila looked up at the gray Manhattan sky. Not yet, she murmured. The world still needs to know what kind of man he really is. Well, and behind her, in a penthouse miles away, Clara Voss watched the broadcast on her laptop, her face pale as she whispered, Lila, what have you done? Snow blanketed the city that morning, turning Manhattan's ruthless edges into something deceptively soft. But there was no softness left in Clara Voss. She sat alone in her penthouse apartment overlooking the East River, the television still looping the same footage of Lila's explosive press conference. The once glamorous vice president of Monroe Capital was now the face of a scandal she could no longer control. Every news anchor repeated the same words. Former CEO Blake Monroe under investigation for attempted murder and fraud. Whistleblower heiress exposes corporate conspiracy. Clara turned off the TV with a snarl and hurled her wineglass at the wall. It shattered, leaving a crimson streak on the white marble floor. She had lost everything, her money, her reputation, and soon her freedom. But there was one thing she hadn't lost, her hatred. Her phone buzzed with a notification. A new email. No sender, no subject. Just a video attachment. Hesitant, she pressed play. The footage showed Blake in an interrogation room, his face gray under the fluorescent lights. He looked broken. She set me up, he muttered to the detectives. Clara did everything. She planned it. Clara's stomach turned to ice. Her own voice echoed faintly in the background of the video snippets of old recordings Blake must have kept. "Do whatever you have to," she'd said once. "Just make sure she disappears quietly." He was giving her up to save himself. "Coward," she hissed. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone and dialed his private number. It went straight to voicemail. "Blake," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "If I go down, you go down with me. Don't think for a second that your pretty little wife will get to enjoy your empire without paying for it." She hung up, then opened a drawer filled with flash drives and old documents. Somewhere in that mess was her last weapon, the file she'd hidden months ago, before everything fell apart. The file that contained everything. Off the books, transactions, money laundering schemes, and, most damning of all, Blake's confession about hiring men to silence Lila. Her phone vibrated again. Another unknown number. "Miss Voss," a calm voice said when she answered. "We're calling on behalf of Mrs. Monroe. She's offering you a chance to testify. Full immunity in exchange for cooperation." Clara laughed bitterly. "Immunity? You think I'll let that woman parade me like one of her trophies?" "You don't have many options," the voice said. "The police already have half the evidence. If you don't cooperate, Blake will make sure they have the rest with your signature on every document." John Bow. She hung up and looked around the penthouse once filled with luxury, now littered with broken glass and unpaid bills. For the first time in years, Clara felt something she didn't recognize: fear. Hours later, she stood in front of the courthouse, wearing a long black coat and oversized sunglasses. Snowflakes clung to her lashes. The flash of cameras followed her as she entered, flanked by lawyers. Inside the courtroom, Lila sat quietly in the front row, Noah beside her. She didn't look at Clara as she passed, but her calmness burned worse than hatred. When the hearing began, Clara spoke through clenched teeth, giving names, dates, and transactions. Every word was a nail in Blake's coffin, and her own. By the end, her voice trembled. "He said she deserved to die," she whispered, eyes fixed on Lila. "But she didn't. None of it was her fault." Lila met her gaze for the first time. "It's over, Clara." Clara almost smiled. "For you, maybe. For me, it's just beginning." She stood to leave, but outside, as she stepped onto the courthouse steps, a wall of reporters surged forward. Flashes blinded her, voices shouted her name, and then, bang, a black car screeched from the curb. A bullet shattered the air. Clara staggered backward, a look of shock freezing on her face. The crowd screamed. From across the street, Lila shielded her baby's stroller, her heart pounding as sirens wailed. Noah grabbed her arm. "Let's go," he said urgently. She turned once more, watching Clara's body being covered by a white sheet. "Justice has its own timing," she whispered. And somewhere inside a holding cell, Blake Monroe smiled faintly when he heard the news, unaware that his reckoning was still coming. The walls of Rikers Island were gray and cold, a far cry from the marble and glass Blake Monroe once ruled over. The clang of steel doors echoed as guards led him down the corridor toward the visitation room. His tailored suit was gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit that smelled of disinfectant and defeat. For the first time in his life, no one bowed, no one listened, and no one cared. He sat at the metal table, staring at the clock, waiting for his lawyer. Instead, the door opened and Lila walked in. She looked flawless, composed in a long camel coat, her dark hair pinned back, the soft light catching the delicate chain around her neck. He remembered giving her that necklace years ago, before everything rotted between them. But now, when he saw it, it didn't remind him of love, it reminded him of loss. "Lila," he said, voice cracking just slightly, "you shouldn't be here." She sat across from him, her eyes calm but unreadable. "You said that the last time I walked away from you," she replied. "Only then, I was still naive enough to think you cared." Blake clenched his fists. "You think you've won, don't you?" "I don't have to win," she said softly. "You already lost." He laughed, a hollow sound that echoed through the empty room. "You think this is over? You don't know how many people I made rich, how many politicians owe me favors. You'll see, this won't last." Lila leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "It already has. Every bank account frozen, every asset under your name seized. Monroe Capital is under my control. You're just another headline now." His jaw tightened. You destroyed me. No, she said evenly. You destroyed yourself. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see. For the first time, he couldn't find words. The silence between them was heavy, filled with years of betrayal, guilt, and all the things they never said. Finally, Lila stood. I came here for one reason, Blake. To tell you that Ethan, our son, will never know the man you became. He'll know kindness, honesty, love, the things you called weakness. He looked up sharply, eyes wide. You'll tell him about me, he demanded. She shook her head. No. You don't deserve a place in his story. Her heels clicked against the concrete as she walked toward the exit. Blake stood abruptly, slamming his palms against the glass divider. Lila, you can't erase me. She paused at the door and turned slightly. I already did. When she left, the guards restrained him, dragging him back down the hallway as his shouts echoed into nothing. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, flakes melting on Lila's coat as she stepped into the waiting car. Noah sat behind the wheel, his eyes searching hers. You okay? I thought I'd feel satisfied, she said quietly, but all I feel is tired. Noah nodded. That's what real justice feels like. They drove in silence through the city streets, past the buildings that once bore Blake's name. Giant LED screens now displayed a new headline. Monroe Capital rebranded as the Harrington Foundation. Leadership under Lila Monroe. Back in his cell, Blake stared through the tiny window at the skyline that used to belong to him. The television above his bunk played Lila's live interview. She was poised, radiant, thanking her employees for believing in second chances. Blake's fists clenched as he watched her smile. Second chances, he whispered bitterly. Except for me. Then, faintly, he heard another voice from the TVA, reporter's breaking update. Investigators confirm that Blake Monroe will face additional charges for obstruction and money laundering. His face drained of color. There would be no plea deal, no escape. And miles away, in her Park Avenue office, Lila closed her eyes, exhaling softly. For the first time in years, she felt peace. Because justice wasn't about revenge, it was about finally being free of him forever. The winter sun hung low over Central Park, its pale light glinting off the frozen lake. For the first time in months, Lila could breathe without looking over her shoulder. The chaos had quieted. The cameras were gone. The headlines had shifted to the next scandal. And New York moved on as it always did. But she hadn't. She stood on the terrace of her Park Avenue office, looking down at the city she now ruled. It still felt surreal. Her name, Lila Harrington Monroe, was engraved on the glass doors of the newly rebranded Harrington Foundation, the philanthropic arm she had created from the ashes of Monroe Capital. Every time she saw it, it reminded her that power didn't have to corrupt, it could rebuild. Still working this late? Noah's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to see him standing in the doorway, dressed in a black coat dusted with snow. His smile was warm, grounding. He carried 2 cups of coffee from the cafe downstairs. You look like you could use this. Lila accepted the cup with a small laugh. You always know when I need caffeine. 6 months of running for our lives kind of tuned me in, he said, leaning against the railing beside her. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the city lights flickering below them. The wind was sharp, but the quiet between them felt safe. I went to the cemetery today, she said softly. My father's grave. I told him everything's done, that we're safe now. Noah nodded. He'd be proud. You did what most people wouldn't have survived. Lila smiled faintly. You say that like I did it alone. He turned to face her. You didn't. But you finished it. That was all you. Their eyes met, a flicker of something unspoken between them. She looked away first, sipping her coffee. You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just another man trying to control me. He chuckled. I was trying to protect you, not control you. There's a difference. Back then, I couldn't tell the difference, she admitted. Every man in my life either wanted something from me or wanted to break me. You didn't. He hesitated, his voice lowering. Maybe because I knew what it felt like to be broken. Lila turned to study him. The faint scar near his jaw caught the light. She'd never asked how he got it. Maybe she didn't need to. He cleared his throat, reaching into his coat pocket. I have something for you. She frowned. Noah, "It's not what you think," he said quickly, pulling out a small black box. "Don't panic." Her laugh was nervous. "That's not a great way to start." He opened the box, revealing not a ring but a silver pendant shaped like a feather. Inside was a tiny engraved name. Ethan Foundation. Lila's eyes softened. "What is this?" "A start," Noah said. "I've been working quietly with some of your old employees. We're building a foundation, one that helps single mothers rebuild their lives after abuse or loss." "You inspired it." Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. "Noah, it's yours," he said gently. "But if you'll let me, I want to run it with you." For a moment, she couldn't speak. The weight of everything, loss, survival, redemption, pressed against her chest. Then she smiled, blinking away the tears. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," he said with a grin. "Though I wouldn't mind a better title than assistant this time." She laughed through the tears, shaking her head. "You've earned it." He took a cautious step closer, searching her eyes. "And maybe, when you're ready, we can stop surviving and start living again." Lila didn't answer with words. She stepped forward, closing the distance, and for the first time since her world had shattered, she let herself lean into someone not out of fear, but out of trust. Outside, the city lights shimmered like a promise, and somewhere between survival and love, Lila realized she wasn't rebuilding her life anymore. She was finally beginning it. The city had begun to thaw, but beneath its polished surface, something dark was moving again. Lila could feel it long before she saw the signs. A series of strange messages began arriving, anonymous emails, calls that hung up the moment she answered, and one chilling photo left on her doorstep. Ethan's stroller, empty, parked in a fog-covered park. She'd built an empire on resilience, but that single image nearly brought her to her knees. Her instinct screamed only one name: Clara Voss. It didn't make sense. Clara was dead. The news had shown the footage, the white sheet, the chaos outside the courthouse. But Lila had seen too much of the world Blake had built to believe death was ever that simple. Noah found her in her office late that night, pacing like a caged animal. "You haven't slept in 2 days," he said quietly. She slammed the photo down on the desk. "Would you?" He studied it, his brow furrowed. "This is recent. Look at the trees, no snow. Someone wants you to believe she's alive. Or someone wants to finish what she started," Lila whispered. The next morning, her fears crystallized into horror. Ethan's nanny called in tears. The security system had gone offline for 6 minutes. When it rebooted, Ethan's crib was empty. "Noah!" Lila screamed, rushing through the nursery as police swarmed the apartment. "Find him." The officers tried to calm her, promising amber alerts, roadblocks, protocol. But she knew protocol wouldn't save her son. This wasn't random. This was personal. Hours later, her phone rang. Unknown number. Her heart stilled as she answered. "Hello, Lila," came a voice she thought she'd never hear again, smooth, venomous, alive. "Clara." She breathed. "I see you've done well for yourself," Clara purred. "New title, new company, new man. But you still make the same mistake. You think power keeps you safe." "Where's my son?" Lila demanded. "You'll see him again," Clara said lightly. "As long as you do exactly what I say. Step 1, resign from Harrington Holdings. Step 2, transfer every asset under your name to my account. You have 12 hours. Lila's voice trembled, but her fury was ice cold. "You don't scare me." Clara laughed softly. "You should. Because I've already taken everything from you once. Taking your child will just finish the story." The line went dead. Noah was already dialing contacts, tracing the signal. "We'll find her," he promised. "Not Weem," Lila said, grabbing her coat. "This ends tonight." So, they followed the GPS ping to the Brooklyn Bridge, the city's arteries glowing beneath the night sky. The sound of rushing traffic and the hum of distant sirens filled the air. A black SUV idled halfway across the bridge. Lila's heart nearly stopped when she saw Ethan's car seat inside. Then Clara stepped out dressed in black, her blonde hair cut short, her expression as sharp as ever. "You're alive," Lila said, disbelief mixing with rage. "Surprise," Clara replied. "Bulletproof vests. Wonderful inventions. What do you want from me?" Clara smiled faintly. I want you to lose everything like I did. I want you to know what it feels like to beg." Before she could react, Clara pulled a gun from her coat, aiming it at Lila's chest. But she hesitated just long enough for Noah to emerge from the shadows behind her. "Drop it," he shouted. Clara spun, firing once. The bullet grazed his arm. He didn't flinch. In the chaos, Lila rushed forward, slamming into Clara with all the fury she'd been forced to bury for years. The gun skidded across the concrete. The two women struggled against the rail, the icy wind whipping around them. "You took everything from me," Clara screamed. "You took it from yourself," Lila shouted back. With one desperate shove, Clara lost her balance. For a split second, her eyes widened, not in fear, but in disbelief, as she tumbled backward into the black water below. Silence fell. Only the city's hum remained. Noah ran to Lila, clutching his bleeding arm. "It's over," he panted. She turned toward the SUV, opening the door. Ethan stirred, safe, unharmed. Tears filled her eyes as she held him close. "No," she whispered, trembling. "Now it's over." And far below, under the freezing waves, a single strand of blonde hair drifted away, proof that some monsters never truly drown. The following week, Manhattan pulsed with anticipation. The story had exploded into global headlines. Harris Lila Harrington Monroe survives kidnapping orchestrated by ex-mistress Clara Voss. Former CEO faces federal charges. It was everywhere. Times Square, billboards, morning talk shows, podcasts dissecting every betrayal and twist. The city that once whispered her humiliation now chanted her name. But for Lila, fame was a double-edged blade. She stood before the mirror in her penthouse, adjusting the pearl earrings that had once belonged to her mother. Tomorrow, she would testify in court against Blake Monroe. It would be the final act, the moment when truth and consequence would finally meet. Downstairs, Noah waited in the lobby, scrolling through news updates. "You ready?" he asked when she approached. "As ready as I'll ever be," she said, forcing a smile. The courthouse was already surrounded by cameras when they arrived. Protesters, reporters, curious onlookers all shouting her name, snapping photos, thrusting microphones forward. Lila kept her chin high, the same way she had learned to hold it the night her dress was torn apart under the chandeliers of the Plaza Hotel. But this time, she wasn't the victim walking out into the rain. She was the storm walking back in. Inside, the courtroom was a theater of tension. Blake sat at the defense table, dressed in a navy suit that couldn't hide the fatigue etched into his face. His once perfect posture had wilted. His eyes flickered up when Lila entered. For a second, she thought she saw something human, remorse, maybe, but it vanished as quickly as it came. The judge called the session to order. The prosecution presented its case: financial fraud, attempted murder, conspiracy. Every word carved Blake's legacy deeper into infamy. When it was Lila's turn to take the stand, she walked with measured grace. The oath felt heavy as she placed her hand on the Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do." The prosecutor, a calm woman in a gray suit, began gently. "Mrs. Monroe, can you describe the nature of your husband's relationship with Clara Voss?" Lila's voice was clear. "They weren't just lovers. They were partners in crime. Every decision they made together, financial or personal, was about control. And when I became a liability, they tried to erase me." The courtroom was silent, hanging on every word. "Did you ever fear for your life?" "Yes," she said simply. "But I stopped being afraid the moment I realized fear was exactly what they wanted." The defense attorney objected, but the judge overruled. Lila continued, recounting every lie, every threat, every moment of betrayal with precision, not as a victim seeking pity, but as a witness delivering justice. When the questioning ended, she glanced toward Blake. He avoided her eyes. The verdict came 2 days later. Guilty on all counts. Life imprisonment without parole. The courtroom erupted in gasps and flashes. Blake's expression remained eerily calm as officers cuffed his wrists. He turned to her as they led him away. "You destroyed me," he said softly. She met his gaze. "No. You destroyed yourself the moment you chose cruelty over love." Outside, reporters flooded toward her. Someone shouted, "Lila, what does justice feel like?" She paused, looking out at the skyline glowing gold against the winter Sunday. "It doesn't feel like victory," she said. "It feels like peace." That night, in her office, she sat with Noah watching the evening broadcast. The anchor's voice filled the room. Blake Monroe sentenced to life. Harrington Foundation launches new initiative to support survivors of domestic and corporate abuse. Lila exhaled slowly. "It's over," she whispered. Noah smiled faintly. "No, Lila. It's just beginning." She turned toward the window, where the lights of the city shimmered like stars reflected on glass. For the first time in years, the reflection staring back at her didn't look like a woman who had lost everything. It looked like a woman who had reclaimed herself. And far away, behind prison bars, Blake stared at a single newspaper clipping of her triumph, his last empire now reduced to the name of the woman who had once loved him. Spring came softly that year, the kind that didn't announce itself with noise or color, but with sunlight sneaking gently through the blinds. Lila stood on the balcony of her townhouse in the Upper East Side, cradling a cup of coffee as she watched the city wake. It was quiet, the kind of quiet she'd once thought she'd never know again. Down the hall, baby laughter filled the air. Ethan, now walking, stumbled toward Noah, who caught him mid-fall and lifted him high into the air. Lila smiled. For the first time in years, her mornings began with laughter instead of fear. The Harrington Foundation had grown beyond her imagination. What started as one office and a dream had become a movement. Survivors of manipulation, greed, and domestic betrayal now had a place to rebuild, not with pity, but with dignity. Every time she walked through the headquarters on Fifth Avenue, she felt her father's presence in the marble floors and glass walls. His name was on the plaque in the lobby, William Harrington, a legacy redeemed. But even in peace, ghosts sometimes visit. That afternoon, as sunlight spilled through her office, Lila received an envelope, no return address. For a second, her stomach tightened with an old, familiar dread. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single photograph. Blake Monroe in prison, sitting in the yard, reading a book. On the back, written in neat handwriting, were two words: "Thank you." She stared at it for a long time, unsure what to feel. Gratitude, pity, closure, maybe all three. She placed the photo in a drawer and locked it away. The past had already taken enough from her. That evening, she met Noah and Ethan at the Foundation's charity gala, night filled with soft jazz, crystal chandeliers, and laughter echoing through the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. The event raised millions for survivors, but it wasn't the numbers that moved her, it was the faces. Women who once trembled in courtrooms now stood proud in silk dresses, holding their own futures again. When Lila took the stage, the applause felt like an embrace. She looked out at the crowd and spoke from the heart. 2 years ago, she began, her voice steady, I stood in this very city with nothing, no power, no home, no safety. I was called weak, naive, broken. But sometimes, being broken is how the light gets in. The audience fell silent, every word hanging in the air. I've learned that revenge doesn't heal, she continued. Justice does. And healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means remembering without fear. She glanced at Noah, who stood near the back, smiling with quiet pride. So tonight, she said softly, this isn't just about rebuilding lives. It's about reminding every woman that no matter how powerful the storm, the sunrise still comes. Thunderous applause filled the room. Lila stepped down, her heart full, her past finally at peace. Later, on the terrace, Noah joined her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. To new beginnings, he said. To peace, she corrected, smiling. They clinked glasses. The city lights reflected in her eyes, bright and alive. Do you ever think about him? Noah asked quietly. Sometimes, she admitted, but not with anger anymore. I think about how close I came to becoming what he was, and how lucky I am that I didn't. Noah brushed a stray curl from her face. You rebuilt everything, Lila, even yourself. She looked up at him, warmth spreading through her chest. Maybe that's what love really is, not losing yourself for someone, but finding yourself beside them. Tem. In the distance, fireworks burst over the Hudson, scattering color across the night sky. Ethan clapped his tiny hands, giggling at the lights. Lila bent down, kissing her son's forehead. You'll never grow up afraid of power, she whispered. You'll grow up knowing kindness is stronger. The music swelled from inside. Laughter spilled out onto the terrace. And the night felt infinite. Because after years of betrayal, loss, and pain, Lila finally had everything she'd ever wanted. Not wealth, not vengeance, but peace, love, and the freedom to breathe again. So, that's how our story finally comes to an end. And if you're still here, my friend, watching until this very moment, it means something inside this story touched your heart in a quiet, honest way. Maybe it reminded you that even after betrayal, loss, and pain, healing is possible. Lila's journey wasn't just about revenge. It was about rediscovering strength, dignity, and peace. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The obstacle is the way." And maybe that's what life is trying to tell us. That the hardest moments aren't punishments, they're invitations to grow. When people betray you, when the world falls apart, you still have the power to rebuild not the same life, but a better one. So if you've ever been broken, let this story remind you that your scars are proof you survived, and that survival is the beginning of something greater. If this story reached you, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because somewhere out there, someone else needs to hear that peace doesn't come from winning battles. It comes from learning how to live after the storm. We'll see you in the next story, my friend. Until then, take a deep breath, hold on to hope, and keep healing.